Democrat running for governor. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It's now the mad dash to the finish line before the primary. How are you gearing up? What are you changing differently with just 9 days to go?
Well, all along, our campaign has been very focused on grassroots organization and people talking to neighbors and people they work with in their communities, in their neighborhoods, very much neighbor-to-neighbor campaigning. We don't have the big money on our side, but I think when it comes to grassroots organization and people power, ours is by far the richest campaign in the race. We've got over 3,000 volunteers in every part of the state working on the ground, reaching out to voters directly. That's what we've been banking on all along, is to break the grip of money power and challenge that money power and overcome it with people power.
Now, you don't have as much funds, like you just said, as the rest of the campaign. The latest report says you have about $68,000 cash on hand. What are you planning to do with the remainder of that campaign cash on hand? It might be different because that report was a few months ago. But also, you're taking a little bit of different approach. You are not going to be on TV, but for millennials, a lot of people have streaming sites, Netflix, Hulu. You choose Hulu. Why, and why are you going that route?
We are doing some advertising online and with streaming services, and that is to reach people who increasingly don't watch regular advertising on commercial television. Young people often do use things like Netflix and Hulu, or so many people now have DVRs and they'll simply forward through commercials. And so we do have a strategy that aims at trying to bring advertising to people who aren't reached the conventional way, but then so much of our focus has really been on grassroots organization, getting people out there, knocking on doors, attending the fairs and the festivals and the farmers markets, making phone calls, reaching out to neighbors directly. That's been a huge focus of our campaign. So actually, when we looked at the kind of funding we needed to run the grassroots style campaign that we're running, we've actually exceeded our goals with fundraising, and we're actually ahead of where we thought we would be at this stage in the race. So we have the funds to run the kind of campaign that we're aiming to run. We're just not following the traditional political playbook that so many of the other candidates swear by.
Do you think that type of campaign can work, especially in such a crowded field, with a lot of the top four are on TV? Do you think that will hurt you?
I actually think it's the way to go. I think the conventional playbook, raise a bunch of money, chase fat cat donors from coast to coast, stockpile those funds, and then do an ad dump at the very end, is a strategy that is failing all across the country, and especially in a primary election, in the summer, in a very crowded field of candidates. I think the ground game will beat the air attacks, and it's happening all across the country. You look at that recent congressional primary in New York City.
New York. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a candidate who was outspent 10-1 was down, according to the poll, done 3 weeks before the election, was down by 36 percentage points, and ends up beating a House Democratic leader by 15 percentage points. That shocked the nation, but that kind of thing is actually happening all across the country. And I think because the old political playbook is failing, and we're banking on overcoming money power with people power.
Low-end campaign cash, but also ranking 5th place, kind of tied for 5th in the latest Marquette University Law School poll. Are you worried about these polls and not topping them? Obviously, your opponent, Tony Evers, has been topping national polls, statewide polls. How do you stand out against him? And what are your views on these polls? I've had several candidates kind of half and half. Some are, of course, going to use that to their advantage. I'm in the top 3, or others just don't really care what the numbers say.
Yeah, it depends on which poll you look at, and they've been wildly inconsistent. One of the findings in a recent Marquette poll was that when they did head-to-head matchups between the candidates and the governor, I was actually running strongest among any of the Democratic candidates. But the bottom line to me is that the only poll that is valid, the only poll that matters, is the one that's going to be done on August 14th. And the fixation on these polls and treating these election campaigns like horse races, who's out of the gate first, who supposedly is in the lead as the finish line approaches, these polls have been shown across the country to be regularly and spectacularly wrong. And what we're seeing is that the pollsters just don't have a way of determining who actually will show up to vote in an August 14th primary. So yeah, I think you can just throw all those polls out the window, and the one that matters is going to be on August 14th. And that's the one that will truly be valid, because the people who choose to go out and vote on that day, their voices are going to be heard.
And how do you think you stand out against the rest of the candidates? Most of you guys, out of all 8, on the issues like education, no one really likes Foxconn. Everyone thinks it's a bad deal. How are you breaking from the crowd? Besides, you know, you have your campaign as blue jeans governor. You know, you're not in a suit and tie knocking on doors, trying to, you know, really resemble with regular folks. How do you think you stand out against the rest, and who do you think is your biggest competition?
Well, you know, I was the first candidate in the race to come out and say that we should make Badger Care a public health insurance option for everybody in the state of Wisconsin. Anybody should be able to buy into Badger Care. Now, virtually all the candidates in the race have joined me in taking that position. I was the first candidate in the race to come out for fully legalizing marijuana, to deal with one of the root causes of mass incarceration that has doomed us to a state budget that spends more on prisons than the whole university system. Now pretty much everybody in the race has joined me in taking that position as well. But the one place where they won't join me is the influence of big money in politics. And of course that's been my life's work, exposing the influence of big money and corruption in our government, and working to break that stranglehold that wealthy donors have on the Capitol. That's been a huge part of the work I've done my whole adult life. And I decided I'm going to run a campaign that practices what I've preached all those years. I'm not going to take these huge donations. I'm not going to chase fat cat donors from coast to coast, because I know the strings that are attached to those big donations. And I stand alone in the race in saying no to those influences. I consider those huge donations to be legal bribes. I know the strings that are attached to them. I know the effect that those transactions have on government decisions. We end up having a government that works incredibly well for a wealthy and well-connected and privileged few at the very top, but it leaves an awful lot of people behind. And there are so many people whose voices aren't being heard, their interests are not being represented, and it's because of the cronyism and corruption and legal bribery that has taken root in our system. And all the other candidates are not only comfortable with chasing those huge donations, but they're actively seeking them and accepting them. And I stand alone in that regard. And I think it takes a movement to beat the machine. It means challenging and overcoming money power with people power. That's what our campaign is all about. And that's the one thing that absolutely distinguishes me from the rest of the field. They have allowed me to stand alone when it comes to the way I run a campaign and the way I would govern as our next governor.
You're also the only candidate who has vocally said you will not, you know, accept whoever the nominee is. Why won't you back whoever wins the primary if it's not you?
Well, I can say this for certain: I'm not voting for Scott Walker. We need a new governor. We need a new direction for our state, a very different kind of leadership and a new politics. If we're going to have a government that works for all of us, we need that. But it's just a mistake to make party loyalty pledges. The message it sends to voters is that party's more important than anything, that the candidates think that party comes before people, party comes before country, party comes before anything. And as long as a candidate has the D behind the name, then that's who a Democratic candidate should support. That's just a huge mistake, and it's also a message that I think is incredibly disrespectful to voters who are fed up with that hyper-partisanship, and they're sick and tired of the fact that we've got a government where Democrats and Republicans put party ahead of everything and can't talk to each other, much less work together and hash out differences. They're so frustrated by that. And for candidates then to turn around and say, yep, whoever has a D behind the name, that's who I'm for, that kind of party loyalty pledge is a mistake. And I won't make that mistake.
But why not get behind a candidate that, you know, you believe can beat Scott Walker? So you're saying you don't believe anyone, the other 7 opponents you're going against, can beat Scott Walker as long as they have a D next to it?
What I'm saying is that let the voters decide on August 14th who their choice is. And August 15th is the time to talk about who you're going to get behind. But let the voters decide. Respect their wishes and respect their opportunity to decide who they want representing them. But, you know, bottom line is that there are candidates in this race who I don't think can beat Scott Walker. And I wouldn't be in this race if I didn't see something missing, if I didn't see an absence of people who are willing to challenge the big money game and the corruption in our government. I wouldn't be in this race at all if I didn't see a void that needed to be filled. And so I'm not comfortable simply saying because of party loyalty or party allegiance, I would back anybody regardless of who they are, where they stand, where they're coming from. And just bottom line, I think party loyalty pledges are a mistake. I pledge loyalty to the people of Wisconsin, not to any party. But then that has a lot to do with my own background. I have not belonged to a political party over the course of my life, and I've done work as an independent watchdog that put me in a position of calling out Democrats and Republicans whenever I saw wrongdoing or unethical behavior. And so, you know, that is who I am, and I don't flee from that now that I'm running for governor.
Now, there's been calls for one of your opponents, candidate Matt Flynn, to step out of the race because of his work with the Archdiocese in Milwaukee. 2 Democratic state lawmakers have called for him to step down. Of course, the Republican Party, Governor Walker. What are your views on that? And you said you don't think some candidates can win this election. Weigh in on that, and as one of those Matt Flynn, are you asking him to step out?
Well, what's happened with Matt Flynn is a great example of why I was standing alone as a candidate saying it's wrong to make a party loyalty pledge, because now some of the candidates are turning around and saying, well, maybe I'm uncomfortable if Matt Flynn becomes the nominee. And one of the other candidates has now effectively broken the pledge that he made and said, actually, Matt Flynn should step out of this race. And I've just simply said, let the people decide. But it's a reason why I wouldn't make that party loyalty pledge, because here you've got a candidate who now is embroiled in this growing controversy about his representation of the Catholic Archdiocese in Milwaukee and its attempts to protect priests who were engaged in child abuse and other sexual misconduct. And people are saying, well, he hasn't been entirely forthcoming and maybe he should get out of the race. But everybody but me in the race had said that regardless of who the nominee is, they would back that nominee. And that would, of course, include Matt Flynn. And now some of them are starting to have second thoughts. Well, that's a great example of why it is just wrong to make a blanket party loyalty pledge. Bottom line is that nobody should get an endorsement because it's owed to them. They have to earn any endorsement. They have to earn support. No support should be owed to anyone in this race. That support has to be earned. And we have to earn it from the voters. And we have to show people that we'll fight like crazy for their interests, because they've been betrayed. There are an awful lot of people out there who feel like the folks who are in charge at the Capitol don't even know they're out there. They don't feel they have a voice. They don't feel they have representation. They don't feel that their concerns are being taken seriously. And they've got good reason to feel that way. It's because we've got a government that does cater to a well-connected few and ignores the wishes of an awful lot of people out there.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the trade war. We talked to a farmer who has seen firsthand the effects in Wisconsin. Stay with us.